machine.
Perfect. It's
So
not
it's gonna
perfect.
be, up and up, I mean,
And
to
that's
do that
kind of
takes quite an art.
Yes, it does. It takes a nice steady hand, and it actually takes, actually, let's have another page. It actually takes, the trick is to kind of use not a heavy wet brush, but you need enough liquid on it so that it will flow and be all in one stroke. You can't brush back and forth over. Conversely, the worst painting job is where you just take a solid wet brush and put on one thick layer. So if there's a
Or you
balance-
spray paint it and then you screen.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Usually with a cut brush is, you're dipping, you're wetting, you're wiping it off, and then you start, on a cut brush is, angled, and so that top bristle starts to be called, what I call the leading edge. So you start drawing it down, and you can just see the line being very, very straight as you go down. And you get to the corners.
So a really good brush is important.
Yes.
Disposable brushes should never ever be used. Try to cut it.
But to me, that's part of glazing. How do you paint that? And that's not another.
You always buy the best brush you can buy. I mean, you go into a Sherwin-Williams store, or whatever store you go into, just go to the most expensive
Look for
brush
Coronas.
section and
We
buy that.
pay, some brushes are $30, $40.
Yeah.
Yeah, look for Corona, that's the best brush.
Corona, yeah.
Period,
Yeah.
yes.
Can't you just tape it off?
Priming.
You can't tape it, no. No,
You
because when you
use
tape it
an
in
oil-based
Can't pay
primer
for it?
versus a water-based primer.
I'll let Dale take that one.
well, that's we're in a changing world, and so with some of the new latexes that are coming out now, like Duration, for instance, Sherwin-Williams Duration, and Benjamin Moore has the equivalent. Are you?
15 years, yeah.
Yeah. What's the Benjamin Moore equivalent of Duration?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What's the Benjamin Moore equivalent of Duration? I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but anyway, they make.
We actually use mostly latex primers. And
Yeah.
Trying to cut out oil-based
Right.
in general.
Duration, in fact, insists that you use latex primers, except on old wood. But typically, we use an alkyd primer on historic woodwork. The most commonly used one is Sherwin-Williams A100. And you get it bumped or tinted to something near your finish color so that you don't have to work so hard to cover it. And then latex top coats. The only time that we use alkyd top coats is on exterior doors. There's an argument for sashes too, because when you apply latex paint to a sash, it stays flexible for half a year at least. And if you're opening that window daily, especially if it's a modern window like a new Marvin or Color or something window, they stick, whereas an alkyd paint is a thinner layer, it's a harder layer, and it does not stick. So even now, with all the technology being poured into latexes, I would still always paint a door or bulkhead door with an alkyd paint. Do you agree?
I agree, yes.
Yeah.
And any metal surfaces.
Yeah, and any metal surfaces, yeah. And sashes are in between. Part is lifestyle and types of the window. I mean, on this house, we can paint them with latex because there's enough play in there that it's not going to be an issue. But if you have brand new windows in a brand new house, it is going to be an issue. And it's just, but it's done all the time. Well, they're usually clad. So it's not an issue.
Let me talk about this next step a little bit, because if you live right in this area, there's a good chance you're going to see this detail. A lot of the houses, the weights are accessed from this space. And you'll find that they're beveled back. All you'll see is a little line across here. But these will actually be two separate pieces. And this will be beveled back, and there's generally just one nail right through where it's beveled. In this instance, the sashes are accessed by this pocket. And Chris will show you that. It's a really neat detail the carpenters did.
What Bill was just talking about again is it's in the jam. The jam is there. This is our front face. And what they've done is they've created a beveled situation, both angled this way, and beveled on each end to create this pocket for the weights. Normally we don't see this coming out of the face, but there's more like this around here, and this is what you'll be seeing. Now, that provides easy access to the weights in a wider situation to get to, and inside, there is the weights that we have right now presently up inside there, and then there's the lower weights, and there is a sliding partition in between that goes up and down, that allows the weights to be separated, this way one's not hanging on the other, and they get jammed up inside each other.
There's often a hole drilled in that partition, so you can put your finger in,
Yes.
up and down.
And they quite often don't come down.
Yeah.
So, this is our weight. Now, sometimes you periodically, it's been painted, it's been sometimes nailed, and you don't see the nail. Sometimes they have nails going in, like in this direction, toenail down into there. Again, the same thing, shearing them, trying to get them to break, popping them just a little
This is
bit.
the case
punching them
almost
through.
wiggling, just wiggling back and forth, does it more than anything, because it is on a taper.
And obviously our promise is that this is splayed back, and we have to get in there and give it a little bit of pry, try to be as gentle and as nice as you could possibly be in a situation like that.
And that's where you would, like, if we took a putty knife and just cut straight in, and we just cut straight in, that breaks that bond right there. And then to pry it out, you could work it from the back, try it, always work from your back surface, and you just get it to walk a little and it'll start. We put a putty knife here. Now, some of these, sometimes you'll actually have to slightly sacrifice a piece or mar it just to protect everything else. We had some that were so tight, what we ended up doing was cutting with a chisel, cut a tapered notch in here so we make a seat. Just cut in and make a nice clean seat. Then we could put a chisel in there and pry it firmly, not just punch a chisel in and try and wedge it, it's just gonna pop out. We actually cut a nice deep notch, and then that we can clean and fill.
Yeah,
Now-
which I wound up doing here, maybe it wasn't a real straight cut, but I wound up seating something right in there to allow me to start to pry and action on it.
Are all the windows like this?
For the most part,
In this house, yeah. Yeah,
the
but
house has three areas. Each area has a little more sophistication. The laundry is probably the least sophisticated, more what you try to find in a farmhouse. The kitchen wing is a little more, and then the main house, obviously, they call it.
So-
I don't know.
So Bill,
This is the old sash room.
That's nice.
but that panel's actually cut out of different wood than the outside of the box, right? Because in order to get those double Ds, you have to sacrifice one of them, right?
And that's the,
That's our weight.
is that the original way?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Were there any markings? Is it cast?
And dirt cast iron, we only pulled out one leg.
Any markings on them
Place.
since they were cast?
Just say
Well,
what?
Any markings
where
on
they're
them?
cast?
If they were cast, did they?
Well, typically, the only markings
Oh, there is markings, yeah.
would be pound. There'd be some Roman numerals to indicate the weight of them.
No, it says 14 something 12.
No,
That's kind of an interesting mark.
It's actually a smoother casting than a lot of them.
You just took that out of that one?
I just took it out that way right there. That was, now, he took the back weight out first. I think, right? The frame, was that the back weight? I know, that was, this is front, but what was that one? That was the back?
We're
All right,
very
hold on.
precise, there's not an
Well, let
extra
it-
quarter inch to get these weights out.
This is
You have
where
to
the
be
panel
very
is.
careful with your fingers.
This is where the panel bar is.
Well, I shouldn't say more commonly, but often you'll find in houses that the sash access panel is right here. And so one edge of it is covered by the dado, or is in this dado, and the other one is here and here. And so it's a much smaller panel that goes,
Is there a marking like that?
that comes out. And if you have interlocking weather stripping, you won't be able to see it. It'll be totally covered by the weather stripping. And so that's where you have to use a little zen and just a little sniffing around to figure out whether it's there or the face.
And we actually found,
There's a piece of wood that separates the two weights, the
Yes.
upper and lower,
yes,
and that moves?
Yes.
it can, yes. In this case, it does. Sometimes they were just hung from the top and they kind of flop back and forth. It was just to keep the two weights from coming in contact with each other.
It's not supported by anything.
No, it's just laying in there loose.
It
Basically,
floats.
what you have
It's in
is.
two dados, so
So
consolidate.
see this?
Yeah.
Actually, Dale, we found out that it's only in one day.
Really?
It's in one dado, and I think what they did was they went in like that. You know what I mean? It just went in and snapped in.
But
And then-
19th century ones typically are two.
Yeah, so
So
basically
they'd
what you
be
see
put
is
in
here's
when
the
they're
part.
assembled.
Yes, yeah. They went in before the inside lining of the jam was put in.
Right. So this is basically the two boxes, and there's a timber header across the top, and it's a solid sill. So this plow you see right here, this Mercury plow, it's got the same thing on the inside. And sometimes they're on both interior faces.
I'd like to point out a very important part of the process that I really respected that Chris is doing right now, which is labeling each part. Every part of the window that they've been taking out is very carefully labeled. And what's more, if you go on a tour of the house now, you'll see that for the most part, the individual parts of the window that have been deconstructed have been left close to the windows as well, because with about 70 windows that are being taken apart in the house, because that's how many your house has, we find that to keep everything as close to each individual window as possible also is safest. Even if it's labeled, it's less likely to be lost if it's close to where it came from.
Put it in a bag.
Again, that's the same marking.
What is it, 14?
I'm working on 3 windows in my basement that are double hung, so they have weights like that. There's no
Probably at the very beginning.
separation between the weights from the upper and lower. I need to replace that.
Well, not necessarily. See, you kind
This is very
of,
early.
for as many ways as there are carpenters, there's ways of doing things.
All right.
So if it works, you know, if it looks like they were never there and they work,
It doesn't look like they were ever
they may
there.
not have the original space to put
What's
them in.
another type of mark, whether it's a number or not?
It's interesting.
You mentioned different levels of finish in different parts of the house. In my house, the front windows have weights on them, but the rear windows, which are much smaller, do not have weights. And I think that there's a metal, instead of a parting bead, there's just a metal strip that holds the two things apart. Is that common, that there would be different mechanisms
Yes,
for making them?
absolutely, absolutely. And it's again, it kind of when you see this house, and you see how fancy and formal this section is, and you see how the helper is in the back, which is kind of portioned to their home. A lot of times, we used to call that barn sash. My house was just basically barn, you could buy for a barn, you just bought loose sash, and they used to just make a wood frame and pop them in. They, to operate them, we slid it up, you stuck a stick underneath it, you know, and that was, by people here that have windows in
The
it.
front weights are not.
It's good to name,
It's just a bad
if you
word.
put a lot of windows at once, it's good to assign numbers to each window, and
Just the back weights.
we always assign numbers the same way. We use the elevation, the floor, and the number from left to right. So this, if we all accept that that's E, is E101, this is E102, you know, going across the front. The one directly above us would be E201, E202, the basement would be B,
And
would be EB1.
And we appreciate that in the field.
It's-
That really
it's
makes
big
it,
because-
you don't have to be carrying the print all the time.
Right,
You can just
right.
look at your elevation and know where
If you're on the scaffold, you can
mistakes.
say, okay, I'm 3 over, I'm in 306, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
If you're 3 over, you'd be in 303.
But that, when we go so far as we label every sash weight, for example, this is a south window, so we have we're going to have a west, we'll have an upper sash weight west, upper sash weight east, lower sash weight west, lower sash weight east, same with the pulleys, they all go back in there, the exact same opening. And I will say, when you get the pulleys, the older they are, it's not like mass-produced hardware today. A lot of old pulleys and old hardware, things weren't square. So they were actually gained in for that pulley in that location. Sometimes you switch them around, you'll find the same way with bolts.
And the axle is actually riveted in? It's-
Well, yeah, what you find is like, so the edges aren't square on one, and maybe one goes this way, the next one goes that way.
Those are screwed
And
in.
this works the same way as your chain.
They
That's
were
just cheap.
screwed in.
Yeah.
These are not original screws.
Do you think the pulley is
These are a
original?
steel screw, I think.
Do you think this is original or is
What do you
this?
think that is? It doesn't
No,
have,
that's
is that original?
It's a little larger. Was that an inner or
It's
outer?
actually
Chris?
smaller.
Is that the outer?
This is
The
the,
lower side?
this is the lower side.
When we get to the upper side, it's the original screws.
Yeah.
See what Ephraim is doing up there? He's using the side of a screwdriver and
Yeah.
tapping on it to clean out the slot.
We'll show you the hand cut. The
With
hand
the-
cuts come out really hard.
With these slots, with the paint in there, just to go straight in with a screwdriver, as Bill was saying earlier, you know, you got pressure in, put pressure more, you're denting it a little bit, but you can't get truly in there. So if you don't scrape down with your screwdriver that you're gonna use, and then hit it. And then once hitting it, doesn't mean it's gonna turn, because it could be really lodged in there. You gotta continue, as you're turning, tapping and putting pressure. And sometimes you have to do that for the whole, for the whole screw, and that can be very annoying after a while, but you have to do it.
Right.
The moment you think you can just start turning is the moment you're gonna strip the screw. And that's the moment you want.
So if you notice, you haven't heard a screw. We haven't heard a screw. So.
This actually can be, this can take as long to get the screws out as pretty much anything we have
Yeah.
to do.
And you can't have a screwdriver with rounded corners.
Right, it's gotta be a
Never
nice,
clear the slot.
clean. it's
You
gotta
gotta
be
have
nice-
a new, clean
They
screwdriver.
have to, yeah, they have to fit, they have to be the right.
So it's gonna give you a problem, isn't it?
His is rounded?
And you'll see, and we may encounter this. One of the things you find is
Thinner
all you
screwdrivers.
Yeah.
The crane actually has a smaller, thinner.
have to wrap on it
With that.
really twisted. And as soon as you bring it,
Instead of a
it's
really sharp edge.
like there's a very aggressive taper, so as soon as you bring it.
We sometimes
it
lose
comes out easily.
You sometimes lose it, and when you lose it, you have to drill it out.
Yeah.
So you take a drill just slightly larger than the shaft of the screw, and you can drill through and just drill the head off. Pop the hinge, then you usually have enough end projecting out, you can fire.
Sometimes, if we could go back just a minute, because I think for you all at home, one of the most important things is going to be not to destroy beads, to be able to reuse them, because they would have to be custom made. The parting beads are not a big deal. If you have a table saw, you can make your own. As long as they're not, even if they're bullnose, you could skip the bullnose, and it wouldn't be a huge loss to the house. But sometimes you'll find in 19th century ones that these are screwed in. And so if you get that pry bar behind and do a little prying and nothing moves, then you have to go to plan B. And if you look around, and again, just from that poking, sometimes you'll break or crack the paint around where the screws are. And then you would just want to chip away that paint and do exactly what Ephraim was doing there to back out the screw. But if you do any prying, they'll split right at the screw, and that's a sad day. So
On this too, we're pulling it, and I think Phil alluded to it, but just to make sure. On the long ones, if you start just prying, say a nail's here and a nail's here, and you start prying in between somewhere, your possibility you're going to crack it. So what happens is you start in the middle, but once you see where a screw is, once you let your knife in and you see where that screw now, you should move that prying to the nail, to the point of contact, to the point of fastening. So if you don't do that, you're just wind up pulling, and it will snap. And then you create a bow, and you might possibly not get that nail out right away, and you might not get that nail out right away. But if you create that bow, then you snap it back, you pull the two nails top and bottom, and then you create the bow again, and it allows you to wiggle it out. Once you wiggle out the two long sides, your long points, then you have your top and your bottom, you can pull them easily.
Will you nail back in the same holes?
No.
and so you always want to start with the long ones, because the top and bottom are rubber to bow.
Right.
And they're too stiff.
Did you break the head, or is it stripped off? The head broke? All right. Let's work on the other one. Let's work on the other one. We'll drill that one out last.
Are those square cross-section weights or rectangular characteristic of the period, or are they unusual? I've only seen these torpedo-like long round things.
I think most of Westchester, at least, where I live, has rectangular weight. They come both ways, we see them either way.
I actually have a picture.
You have a mixture?
Yeah, some round, some rectangle.
Have you seen any?
Yeah, replacements. Again, cast iron here, they're cast iron building. I found them to be just about anything. In almost any kind of shape. I guess there were a lot of companies that made them at one. And needless to say, they're weighted according to your sash. And believe it or not, on these big windows, they actually would put a can of paint. There's like, for example, on a garage door, when you're setting a spring on a garage door, if you were brand new unpainted door, it may hold 2 gallons of paint. Garage door guy will hang 2-gallon cans, they use sand on it, and that gives them their finish weight painted out, so they know their springs were. You wouldn't think it makes a difference, but it can.
It's like the paint on it.
So,
That makes a big difference.
Really?
Oh, huge.
The thickness or the
Well,
gloss?
just this paint, that's why American Airlines does
Right.
paint.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a fuel efficiency. It's a big deal, that's a lot of paint.
Oh, that's funny. I joke about keeping a clean car for better fuel efficiency. Does that help too?
Not as much.
Yeah, so-
Now, what we'll do before they go back is, we'll take a block of wood, we run them into a hole in a block of wood, we'll take a hacksaw with a little set, and we'll clean those slots up. And in this instance, where they're old historic, we will try and put them back. Don't let him walk off behind. I'm not, you're responsible, not me.
Yeah. Don't ever use
I'm only
it.
saying that because we've seen them do it. It tips if you get out on the river.
But not as much as a 5-gallon spackle can.
True.
yeah. Now, with these sash weights, if they ever drop down past where you can get them, it won't hurt to put a small pilot hole through them, just very barely into it, just enough to get something to dig. And
We had to do that on one.
Plus, it goes down too far.
I'm not understanding what you're saying.
You can't get the bottom.
The bottom of the weight.
There's a block, there's a stop block at the bottom. Well, if they're deteriorated, or there's a lot of the dock, if they're deteriorated below, they drop down. So we have one that goes so far, we drill it, and then our nail, hold it in.
Like a nail set, just get it in there and lift to be able to get that bottom
Right.
And you have to be careful, they really take the pins of your finger right off, and they didn't give you a extra quarter inch in that opening to get this out. And we actually found that there's something you
I have no idea.
try and, for the weights, you have to take the back weight out first, right? And a lot of them have room. Front weight won't be
The
there,
front
the
weight
back weight's out.
The top weight goes up.
Correct.
Or it comes out second, right?
No, it's not, it had to come out first, so that we could, because it had more angle to slide out. So we had to slide it, and the back weights out, and slide it, and lay the top over. Which is the opposite of what you.
Yeah, yeah.
But once again, carpenters back then didn't waste a lot, and then probably something like that. They're all within.
Does that one go different from the bottom one, from your other one? The one you have hanging in?
Just talking about the screw.
He's got both forwards out, so there's
Yeah, but the
been.
one in your hand, is that different from the other one, or?
No, it's the same type, it's the revert, that's the rear, the upper sash that have more of the original screws. But and periodically, we have seen open pulley and a more closed pulley, where it's, you know. There has been a few differences in pulleys, some with a brass plate in front of it, some without. And I think the brass plate might have been the older ones, I guess, right?
Yeah, we actually found that the brass cover plate more on the kitchen and the laundry way than we did in the main one.
So we weren't sure of.
So the casting is cheaper, or I mean, the casting was a higher end.
Yeah.
I'll be back one
Michelle, was this house completely the same age, or is the back much older?
It's actually all of, within essentially an 18-month period.
The whole thing?
Exactly, and I think that, what I can tell from the records, it looks like they started at the back, but within the 18 months, you know, they conceptualized that this was going to be one complete structure. I don't want to give that sort of old
It really
fashioned
seems-
version of building from the back to it.
The foundations in the back seem to be placed before the main house foundation.
I know this wasn't part of your talk to begin with, but the shutters. I have interior shutters on my house that fit into pockets like that. But they've got so much paint on them, they don't fit into pockets anymore. Is that simply a matter of layers of paint?
Well, it's a couple things that happen. Over time, some of these structural starts to change, and sometimes the shape of your pocket changes a little, but for the most part, that's all paint.
Okay.
Yeah, and literally, we're seeing across an opening, at least a quarter-inch, probably a quarter-inch bigger now that we've painted on.
We've tried using mechanical means to do shutters. We've had to let them really sand them down good and clean them up.
If you take them to a company with a solid math, you're okay. A solid math, you could be okay.
Somebody did all the shutters in our house before we bought it, and they're in the basement now in horrible condition.
That has their own standard, different than the national standard, but in general, as long as it doesn't impede the window's ability to work or shed water, we generally leave all that wear and that character. Where it affects it structurally or its ability to shed water, then we'll make the repairs. So sometimes you'll see restorations where windows really do look rough, and people don't quite understand why they look the way they do. Other times restorations, they put a fairy material over it, or Swedish putty, and it'll look almost like a shiny new car. It just depends on your protocol.
That's right.
They're not that old, I guess they're built
Pardon me?
my house is built in the 30s, so it's not that old, but like, where there's stuff that's like that, I guess it's like the sill, like on some of them, it's like, I just bought my place, like, it's like starting to rot there, like, are you gonna go through how to get that out and a new one of those?
Well,
Or is it-
but we can.
How do you replace that?
Just the bottom, just the sill.
Yeah, just the sill.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow.
It's,
People never like put anything on the outside, so it just.
there's, where we like to do it is to make a selective replacement. It's quite a bit of work if you're gonna pull the entire sill out. This frame's built around that. But in this instance, a lot of times they're rotted from the outside, or they're rotted in a face or in a certain area. So we'll take 2 hours and we'll just cut out all that bad wood till we get to a good section. For example, I have pieces outside. We have 3x8 Spanish cedar. We might cut back 3 inches into the whole sill by 3 inches deep and cut the outer third off. We use epoxies to glue it back in place, and then screws, and we cover our screws and tie it back together. So the best hope is selectively to remove pieces of it where you still have the overall integrity of the frame there. If you're trying to retool, now in 1930s it's not a structural sill anymore. Ours is a different deal. These carry the weight, they support the brick above it quite often. So it's a little different, so you just can't pull the bottom out without being very careful to know how it's being held or what's going on above.
Hey, Chris, could you show that to everybody?
Yes.
Ephraim just removed the top weather stripping, and one of the issues with interlocking weather stripping is that on the jambs, the sashes are sliding up and down, so that the weather stripping is following that dado and it can never get off track. If you use interlocking weather stripping top and bottom, you're totally reliant on the dado, the groove in the sash being lined up with this.
Right.
And sometimes if your sashes don't meet, it's because the weather stripping has been knocked over top or bottom. The most common place is bottom, and so.
And medium rail.
Yeah, and median rail, but at the bottom, we for instance, never put interlocking weather stripping. We always put a spring bronze, just to eliminate that issue. Anyway, if your sashes don't open all the way, that could be the issue.
If that weather stripping book's still going around, at the medium rail, we have two pieces that interlock. So it's a U-shaped piece and a straight piece that go together. And a lot of times, if that's bent and you force it, it closes it, and then it just won't close. And the other thing that happens over time is, we have found if you have real big windows that are out in the sun, we've actually found cases where they bow, and we're not able to use the interlock and the medium rail also, because that stuff is perfectly straight. And you have to press the two windows together, take that bow out and put them together. So you can make them close once and somebody doesn't know they're coming and just crush it.
Is that interlock original, or is that some relatively modern addition?
Here again, it's basically modern.
20th century, yeah. There was none at the end of the 18th century.
It's
So
just,
you're replacing it with brand new interlock and weather stripping?
yes, we are. We had hoped to reuse the old, but it's just nailed so hard we can't reuse.
Yeah, are you gonna use aluminum or is it gonna be
We're gonna
copper?
use zinc.
This is zinc right now.
Yeah, and we're replacing it with zinc. You can also get it in a bronze.
Why would you choose zinc?
Well, it's this color that matches. It's the same thing that was here before, and you don't see it. It's for the most part concealed.
Is it more stable? I mean,
They're both the same. They're both .018, whether it's zinc or bronze. The biggest reason is the zinc is around $2 a foot, the bronze is $5 a foot.
oh,
We have almost 3,000 feet here.
so I got you.
And quite honestly, I thought the bronze would really stand out. It just doesn't read as something we have here. So
I want to get back to what you were talking about, replacing the sills. We just had a number done on our house, and they didn't take them out, but they did cut out the rotted area, and then in order to finish them, they actually used the material in restoring cars. What is that?
Bondo,
yeah, it's a plastic.
Yeah, it's an epoxy used for cars. That's what they finally refinished.
Bondo isn't actually an epoxy, it's a
Yes.
polyester.
It's a catalytic reaction, but it's not.
Yeah,
But they chose to do that
Yeah.
and finish them off.
But yeah, Bondo is not recommended for wood. If you're going to use a fairing type product, you should use the epoxy. The West system is commonly used, and it's really frustrating because it's from West Marine, but it was West 100, 200, but you can buy the resin, which you can use for consolidation, and then you can buy microphones, which look like dust, red dust, which sand very well in terms of fairing, so that would be good application. And then there are cotton microfibers, which are used to make adhesives. And so you can make a really thick paste, or a filler, just like putting more of the fibers.
What we've used for that kind of repair is Abertron.
Abertron is another good product.
Yeah. And we use the liquid to, first to consolidate the wood.
Yeah.
Get out all the rock.
Another good one. We started using that. We've pretty much stuck to the West of the System 3, which are really, I think, made by the same chemical company, have the same process. And they have structural. The Abertron is not something you can do, structural. Now, I can say that when this epoxy first came out, it seemed like a wonderful thing. And a lot of us in preservation jumped on it and really used it to a great extent. Over time, we've had a chance to see how they work, and we've kind of scaled back. In other words, our specification allows us to use either epoxies or wood. We will almost always use a wood repair. It takes a little longer, but when that's glued and it's there, it stays. When we use epoxy, the bond is only between the fibers of wood directly adjacent to the material, how far it soaks in. And the one curse of epoxy is water. If you get any moisture that softens those fibers, it'll release. So we like to try and encapsulate or completely seal a piece of wood with epoxy. Then we know that it's not going to get moisture inside of the top. There's times when soils are getting moisture. We will do a lot of epoxy consolidation of space just because it's so much work to get out. It probably over time, just like with paint, the same thing that's happening with paint. It could lift off, but it buys you a lot of time without going to that next step. What we found is if we use a wood repair, we use the structural repairs and bind the pieces together, and we mix it into a fairing material with the silica and microballoons for gap filling. Also goes for construction. We just had checks. We used to use that epoxy just to fill checks and cosmetic things. We weren't going to use it glazing. Soft and flexible, but permanent damage down the road to make a change.
Hey, Bill, maybe we should not be quite as perfect about our finishing here in order to continue the process.
Well,
You're doing too good a job, Ethan.
While he's got the scraper up there, I wanted to ask, you mentioned using a screwdriver to get the paint out of the screw slot.
right.
Do you not recommend a method that I've used, which is you use your silicone, your carbide scraper, scrape the paint off the surface of the screw?
That's the
and then
very
use
first
the
thing,
edge,
yeah.
the point of the scraper to break into the slot?
A lot of times I'll take a real fine straight tip and I drive it across the face of the screw and you'll pop all that paint off and you get a lot of it, just like you're saying. Yeah.
I don't use a scraper, I'll just
Scraper.
use, like Bill said, I'll just use the flat screwdriver, and on the side of it, one shot usually pops like the majority of the paint off and around the hole
Right.
of the slot too. So it does like a combination, and then you can clean it up by just touching it, and then go through the slot to allow for the break. Because even if you go through the slot and you haven't done anything around it, it's still painted on, and trying to turn it while it's still painted is a problem. So breaking the whole system. Even if you noticed the frame earlier, before he pulled the pulley itself, what he did was he had the screws all out. Now you think it was just come out, but it's still painted. So he took his screwdriver and tapped all the way around it, and it just created a line. You just see the edge of the pulley just show all of a sudden, and now
That's a very good point. Very good point. Because that's where you really do damage when splitting the wood out when you go down to the pulley. And you may not have to take the pulleys out. We are, in this case, we're cleaning them and inspecting them. In a lot of instances, they would not have to come out. And quite honestly, they're really, in some houses, you'll find the pulleys have really worn, and they can be restored. This wheel can be drilled out and pushed. There's a new pin placed. They will sandblast them and put them up. These have almost no wear. Say the upper windows probably haven't operated for 100 years. They probably never, they probably never operated a lot. So there's just not much wear on them.
All right. Yeah, you got your bigger brush? You mentioned it before.
I guess Bill's going to leave us on edge here without showing us how to put sashes back in.
Can we have a follow-up session?
I think you'll need it.
The sash is back in?
Can you talk about it, Chris?
Well, yeah, in essence, I mean, there's a trick, and Bill can explain it a little bit more. This really is, we're gonna have to, a lot of these times, these things are gonna come back. They might go back in perfectly, they may not. There is out of square, some of these things are racked. So, the jams, and so we have to make the meeting rails align. There's gonna be a little bit of work in that, going toward that goal. And because there will be locks and there will be the ability to do that. So what we're going to encounter is that we're going to have to fit the sash. We have to plane one or two, plane an upper, plane a bottom for these meeting rails to meet. And in doing that, we're going to wind up having to install, again, all this weather stripping. There's a trick to this weather stripping because you can't just, you can't put it in first and then make your window go in. It's the reverse order, in essence. And Bill, if you want, you can talk about some of the stuff while I cut some of the stuff for green.
Bill, can
No,
you just
it's
talk
about
generally about
reinstalling
Oh, okay.
the sash. and-
like how do you decide what length to make a sash for?
It's trial and error.
Yeah, right.
Trial and error. And with us, it's a little more difficult for us because typically you make that adjustment at the sash. You can have your weight tied, you know, your cord's tied, drop your cord down to the pulley, pull it out, and you can tie it to the weight. I won't go into the knots right now. There's a couple ways to do the knots. So basically you tie your cord to your weight, you have it coming through, you put your window in, you can close it, you want to get your weight just slightly off the bottom so that you know that you've got complete travel when it's closed. You know where the holes are in the side, and you tie a knot. It's basically just it's a knot that basically you just double up. Take, and I'll try and show you in a minute. Actually, we can get one over here, and we've seen about 3 different ways it's done here. The concept is you don't have your weather stripping nailed, but it's fastened to the sides. So you slide your window in, you've got your 2 knots, and it takes about 4.5 hands to do all this. So you get it in place, and you can just slide it loose and you see if it's going to work. If your rope's too short or too long, you generally just slide one side of your window out. You can pull the knot out of the hole in the window. You change its length and you put it back. For us, since we don't have these holes anymore, it's a little more problematic. They have to be nailed in. So that's where for us, it's going to be a little bit more precise. We'll probably start by just tacking one small nail, short nail, to see if we're there and we'll put it in. Because you can't get it your weight again, you know.
Is there any secret method to getting the rope down? I always drop a piece of string with a nail on it to try to get it.
Perfect. And do you know, actually what we use sash chain for
Yeah.
is for that. I carry a piece of sash chain for fish, it just drops down on its
Yeah.
own.
And what you can do is take that sash chain and take your sash cord, butt them to each other, and just put a loop of duct tape between the 2 so that the weight of the sash chain pulls the cord down with you.
Right down there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's nice to have do the 2 together. But basically, you'll have the 2 sashes hanging without the parting beads or anything else in place.
Exactly. And there's a tremendous amount of trial and error in the weather stripping. And it shouldn't be. In a modern window, you can line your weather stripping right up, and that's going to locate where the windows go, where the hedges and the sill pieces go. In our instance, the weather stripping isn't the exact same width as the windows. And typically in a modern window, that plow is in the inside face towards the heated space. In our window, they did them all on the outside. So my weather stripping doesn't perfectly line up with my parting bead. So we'll actually have to get them in place loose, tack them, make sure they're operating and running up and down nice and straight. And then you'll be able to, you can almost put your headpiece in the window sash, take it up, hold it where it hits the window, pull it away from it, and get a couple tacks in. So there's a lot of trial and error. You don't nail anything hard until you get it all working.
My windows don't have any weather stripping on them now. I'm putting exterior storm. Do you recommend putting weather stripping on it also?
Well, that's really a performance question. If this were Minneapolis, I would say absolutely. You know, but it's Delaware, and it might not be that important. You know, one thing you will notice is that
Pretty expensive, a set of weather stripping.
yeah, but windows rattle more if they don't have weather stripping.
Yeah.
But if you have a good sash lock, you can eliminate a lot
Let's
of that.
tighten that up.
Yeah, you can tighten that up and eliminate a lot of that rattling.
By the way, do these have sash locks?
They will.
They will. They did not.
They originally didn't?
Right.
And how are you going to determine what's the right sash?
We're just putting a modern simple one. In 1805, there really weren't, catalogs of sash locks. There were various mechanisms that were used in the first quarter of the 19th century. Sometimes you've seen the little slot, or it's like a sheet metal spring that's mounted in a jam, and then there are notches cut in the sides of the sash that pull them up. So there were various methods. The earliest of the public, I know in the 1830s,
start to see a
There
lot of
were
Victorian
There were
era.
some beautiful cast ones that were done early on, and then, you know, all through the Victorian period. But I wish that somebody made a simpler, modern sash lock than is available, but we typically, well, there's no typical, but if there's no other option, we would just use hand-type cast bronze sash lock.
Things like Merritt.
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
it best.
Yeah, right, Merit Hardware, run into that.
They're on the internet, they're in this.
Yeah, they, yeah.
There's a long reason on that. Obviously, it's very easy.
But a more readily available one is Ives.
See that fine hardware stores.
Yeah. Ives is a decent one. Merit was a marine hardware company, and then they got into building a limited amount of building hardware. They also create flush pulls and things too,
Exactly.
from the boat days.
I know for the old, what we call barn sash, a lot of times all they would do is there would be a hole drilled through this inner stop. Oh, yeah. And then just the finish nail, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've all seen, you know,
And some of them had a dowel similar to that.
the 18th century restorations where there's a nail hung by a small leather strap, you know, and I'm sure that happened, probably not as often. You see them in restorations.
As Michelle said, the kitchen has very early stops. It's just basically a pin hung from a little leather strap.
Yeah. Are those old?
I'm not sure.
Not original.
Yeah. But that's a valid way, you know.
Yeah.
Valid approach. We're actually trying to seal more air than that here, you know, because we have no storms.
Are you gonna put the blocks in again, or make a double block? Final restoration.
Right, we're putting the blocks back.
The stop block?
Yeah, the outside blocks, are we?
Well, I'd like to do something different than what that
Yeah.
little strip they had there, just put something up in the corners.
Yeah.
You know,
We don't really,
we don't have to.
yeah, right, we don't have to, yeah.
But we are making all the bottom sections.
In essence, they will all be operable, but the intent is only the bottom ones would function. And one of the problems you're gonna find in an old house is, for example, we have one corner of the house has settled slightly. So if the frame cracks, that means your meeting rails don't line up, which means can-type blocks are really hard to get installed. You've got to shape them up, or you got to cut it down into the sash to make it work. And it's really those few that are in that condition. I'll be the ones who would say that
What are you gonna do with the screens if you can open the window?
Probably
In fact,
facts away.
I don't know about anyone else, but I would like to be invited back. And to have this happen in reverse and have it all finished.
It's duly noted, and I have been taking mental notes, and we'll have to get together and talk a little bit, and I'll put my head together with Mike too. I think we've just been lucky this year that with the Reed House and the Save America's Treasures Project and funding that Mike's been able to put together for work at the Dutch Mansfield houses, it's just been a wonderful time to be able to share. So
This
we're
is
happy
great.
to do.
This is extreme.
We're happy that you enjoyed it. So that's the. From my point of view, that part of what has already made our project such a success here at the Reed House is that we've had a wonderful team, and I think you really saw that today. That it's been. We've thrown numerous curves, especially because we wanted to keep the house open during the process, and especially for Bill with managing the project and for our carpenters. Communication has been fantastic, and they have worked with us every step of the way so that we could continue to show off the house, and also let people who are just walking through tours know a little bit about the process of preservation and how important it is to actually keep our buildings in good condition. So, as homeowners, I hope you learned a lot, and we're here as a resource.
Speaking of resources, could you supply Michelle with a list of the suppliers that we use, because we could put that up on the website and make it
Absolutely.
able to access.
Yeah, that's all it
Like the
is.
glass and the nails and.
Sure, that's all in nail specification. Yeah, all right.
I know that you were talking about Tate lumber. There's also at Newport, Durkee fine woodworking. I think they can custom make any of the stops if you happen to break a stop. They're in
It's great to have a
Newport.
local source like
I've
that.
not used them, but I know that they have hundreds and hundreds of cutter heads, so they can probably make just about anything that you need.
DURKEE?
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Down under the bridge.
Somewhere down there.
I don't know if anybody's had a need for lumber that's of another species or of different thicknesses, but the one that I've found has been very good at Delaware Supply.
Delaware County Supply.
Yeah, the best.
We buy from them for,
They're the best.
oh, yeah, we buy from them for, if we need a few pieces, we generally buy 200, we buy wholesale and 250 to sometimes 2,000 for lots. But if I need just